Hi guys, I'm Andrew Davidson. Welcome back to another As Per My Ability video. Got another top 5 video for you today. I'm joined with my buddy Brad, who's done top 5 videos with us before. You can check those out on the channel. Brad, hello, how are you?
Hey Andrew, I'm doing great. How are you today?
Good. So we're actually filming this on the 4th of July in America. It's Independence Day, so I kind of was going to wear my little 4th of July shades and stuff. So it's actually a really great Saturday where we're located and filming. And so this is what we're doing for now anyways, until the fireworks will probably start later. And I might just ditch these things at one point, but I wanted to wear my 4th of July sunglasses just to show a little bit of fun spirit. So let's get into it. I don't want to ramble too much because I'll probably be rambling a lot on this particular video. So the title of this video is Things Within Games That Really Annoy Us as Players. And so Brad and I talked about this, before starting to film and stuff. And we wanted to make sure that we kind of, I guess, split the category and made sure that we focused on arbitrary things within games, and not necessarily about playing games or about certain people playing games with certain people. That would probably be a video in the future. But for this video, we're looking at just things within games. Like you open up a game, you start reading the rules, or you start figuring out, and you go, I really don't like it when games do this. And that's our list. I've got my 5. Brad said he's got his 5. He's going to have some examples. I will probably just ditch these at some point because I can't see very well. But for me, the ranking for me is pretty like 5 to 1. Really, it's just 5 is like pretty bothering, and 1 is like, oh, I just can't stand it. So, Brad, what about you?
Pretty much the same for me. Um,
Yeah.
I, I, I took a little bit of liberty on my top 2 to have them play off of each other a little bit, but other than that,
Okay.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy one to categorize in regards to how to figure out the categorization of them. And so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to start, and we'll just go through our 5, 4, 3, 2, 1s. So things that annoy us in games. My number 5 is what I've written down as silly first player determination. Now, I have to note the word silly, okay? There's some that can get away with. So when you're playing a game, a rule book will usually say, determine a starting player. Okay, you can flip a coin. We usually use an application called Twazi. I recommend people go check out. It's a randomizer first player thing. That I don't mind. I don't mind if game companies will just flat out say, you know what, we really don't have an idea, so just figure it out for yourself. Like just determine the first player randomly. What bothers me, and this is my 5. So what upsets me is the silly type things like whoever went to the bathroom last is the first like starting player. Whichever player looks the most mischievous, they're the starting player. In fact, I'll give you an example. There's a zoo game called Zoo Loretto that basically says whoever can give the most realistic and impressive lion roar is the first player. To me, that's like silly. That's dumb. I'm not gonna roar. Like when I'm not gonna sit around and do that. It might be fun for kids, or like some of them are like whoever's got the craziest beard like goes first, or whoever. There's a game I play that's whoever last like read a novel. That's like, or there's a game called Castell where it's like whoever's last visit wherever that Castell, like Catatonia or whatever, gets to go first. Well, that's never going to be anyone because like no one's ever really going to travel there. Like no offense. So again, I have to make the mark of silly first player determinations. Now there are some that I don't mind, and I'll give you some examples. Like the oldest player goes first, or the youngest player goes first. I don't necessarily categorize that as like silly. That's pretty straightforward. Like, hey, who's the youngest? Here, oh, okay, Brad's the youngest. Like he gets to go first. That doesn't bother me so much. What bothers me is when they start to get cute and clever and whoever the last like Cards Against Humanity, which is I know Brad and I have talked about, not really fans of. It's whoever had the last bowel movement. That's literally how you determine the start player. So my number 5 is like, how do I have it? Silly first player determinations. Just kind of bugs me. Like, just say in your rule book, if you can't come up with something that's not silly and dumb, just say determine a first player at random, and then we can figure it out. Like, we play enough games, we can flip a coin or whatever, roll a d6, and figure it out. So that's my number 5.
Yeah, I guess what I don't like is I've got some friends who will hold you to that if they see that in the rule book. So if it's silly, then it really gets annoying. But as long as they're saying, if they have something silly and they say or determine at random, okay, whatever, that's fine. But yeah, I agree with you there.
I could make a case. I'm not going to, but I could make a case that it could serve the theme, because there are some games that are quirky, and like Clank comes to mind, that's got kind of like a little bit of a meta narrative humor to it, or a game like Munchkin that's kind of like, so there could be like, hey, we have a really silly game and our theme is really to be parody or silly, and so therefore our first player determination is going to be silly as well. That, at least I can understand that from a business perspective, from a game developer's perspective, but from a personal gamer, like, from, obviously these lists are incredibly subjective, so these are mine and Brad's are Brad's. But for me, even if the game is like silly, I don't know if I necessarily like all the different ones that I've seen. Brad, what's the weirdest one that you've seen that you can think of? I'm putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
Or one that you can remember.
Well, there's one I know is a last person to visit an island. I don't know if that's Forbidden Island or
Spirit Island.
I haven't played Spirit Island, so I don't know if that. But yeah, but I know I've seen some, but nothing's springing to my head to tie to a game right off the top.
Yeah, there's a bunch of just random like ones. Whoever has the longest, curliest hair.
Right.
Just silly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my number 5 has to do with, I guess I'm kind of more the oddball that shows up on your channel, because I like to play a lot of Euro games. But something that happens with a lot of point salad games, and that's when the end game scoring is too complex.
Okay.
And the problem is when you're trying to teach a game and the game already has a bunch of rules for how to score points as you're going along, and then it's, oh, by the way, at the end of the game, we're also going to have, if you've got these leftover pieces for this and for that, and this is worth this much, and this is worth this much, and it's just way too much bookkeeping, unless you played it several times, you lose track of it. And game Trajan is the one that really sticks out for me. And so I got the rule book here, Trajan. But anyway, it's a Stefan Feld game. This is what it looks like. Okay. And I love the game. It's got Mancala in it pretty heavily, and I love Mancala games. But I tell you what, there's all this scoring because it's a typical Feld game, point salad game, so to speak, which means there's tons of different ways to score points throughout the game. You score on all these different tracks. And then I've got a whole page here. Sorry, there we go. A whole page full of, at the end of the game, if you've got all these pieces, extra pieces here, now you've scored all the way through. By the way, you're going to have to add points and score points for all these different things at the end, And so as we're going along, we're getting close to the end of the game. If you've only played it a couple times, you got people going, hey, what were those rules again for all these extra pieces? Because they're trying to min-max a little bit towards the end of the game.
Yeah, towards the end, yeah.
And it's just a nightmare to keep track of. And I'll admit, I've played in a few of the Feld games that ends up being like that. And I do enjoy point salad games. When I hear that, that's not a negative term for me.
Okay.
But I will admit, there are some of them that are just monstrosities when you have to try to figure out, how to score points at the end of the game. I think you also run into the issue with a lot of games like this where everybody's all excited as you're going through the game. It looks like somebody's winning. Oh, but now we do have to spend 10 minutes tallying up everybody's scores. And, then by the time you everything's done, it's like, oh, you've got the most points. I guess you won. Yay. The excitement for the game's gone at that point. So, that kind of goes hand in hand with that as well. But I love those types of games while playing them, but when they end, they kind of lose their excitement a little bit. So,
So let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. Is this on your list based on a fundamental like teaching aspect? Is that why it bugs you? Is that why it's on your list?
Mostly for teaching reasons, yes. But it's also just there's too many things to keep track of, at the end of the game. I don't know if that makes sense, but you really have to know the game very, very well for it to, for you to be able to maximize everything. So that's fine. And mastery of games is good in my eyes. But yeah, I would say basically as a teaching thing, it's just a nightmare.
So I actually want to get into just a brief, like, kind of meta discourse for a second. I'm glad you brought up the teaching, and this is something that happened to me somewhat recently. And I want to get your opinion. When you teach these games that have, like you said, this extensive end game scoring, like we're going to score this at the end, and like we're going to score your money scores at the end, and based however many cows you have left is going to score on the end, and then like do you work that into the full teach when you teach someone a new game, or do you kind of like just get them started and then halfway through say, okay, I need to stop the game and talk about the end of the scoring? Like how do you do that?
Just a slight hybrid. So what I'll say is, the cow is here. At the end of the game, you're going to get some points for extra ones left over. Maybe I'll say that briefly as I'm teaching the game. And if it's for everything, it's kind of just to let people know that. And then as we get into the game, I hope to remember to explain it very well. That's my one concern about trying to stop as we get going in the game is that I forget to do it.
Yeah, it's happened.
So
Because I've actually done both ways. I've tried to explain like everything 100% up front, and then it's usually just data dump on people. Like it's too much. They're just focused on what can I do on my turn, because the first time playing. So all this end game scoring stuff usually gets lost, which means they forget about it, or I have to end up teaching it again. And so that usually doesn't work because you just overstimulate people, overstimulate, and then it backfires on you. Then I've also kind of stopped the game about halfway through and say, I just need to make everyone aware, these are going to score, these are going to go score. And then people are just like, oh, well, that would have been nice to know. I've been playing like this or that, or I spent all my cows and now you're saying they're going to be points. And so I've tried both ways, and it's like, I haven't really found one that really works, which is why I wanted to ask you your feedback on it. If there's one that you find that works better than others.
Well, I really think it depends on the game.
There is. I found, because I teach a lot of games, there is a lot of there's a lot to be said about how much like there's like a saturation point with players. You can give them like this rule, this rule, this rule, this rule. This card works this way. Blue cards don't work with red cards, and like there's a saturation point where you end up just kind of losing, where they're just like, so sometimes it's good to just give the overview of the game and then worry about that stuff later, but sometimes not. So cool, good one. I also will be talking about some scoring related things at some point, but my number 4 is not related to scoring, and I actually stole this one, so I have to like come clean. I stole this one from a guy named Z Garcia, who is a part of the Dice Tower YouTube channel. I'm sure people know about them if they're watching us, or if you haven't, type in the Dice Tower. And there's one that he said during because they also have a video about like things in games that annoy us. And when he said his, I was like, yeah, absolutely, that really bugs me. And I have an example of where it happened recently. So my number 4 is factions eliminated due to player count, or parts of the board being eliminated due to player count. And the recent example I have of this is the new version. It's the Gale Force 9 version of Dune. That board game, and there's a bunch of others. This is just the one that I'm using because it's the most recent. That game, you only play with certain factions. If you have 3 players, you're always going to play with those first 3 factions. 4 players, 5 players, then you get to add the other 2 factions. And it's like, I've played Dune quite a few times. I've never touched some of the factions because I've never had that player count. Game of Thrones, the board game, the 2nd edition or whatever it is, or 3rd edition, whatever it's on. Same thing. You like mark off part of the board. You don't play with those factions unless if you have 5 or 6 players. Well, I don't necessarily always have 5 or 6 players. So again, there's literally factions and part of the board in that game that I've never used and never played with just because it's based on player count. And so like what would be better is just to say, here's all the factions you can use, pick them however you want, no matter what player count you have. But some games are like, if you have 3 players, only use these 3 factions. And it really annoys me because it's like, I think I paid for like the full game. Like I want to play with like all the factions, and I don't feel like I should have some social obligation to go out and find new friends to come and play. Hey, we need a 5th and a 6th just so that I can play a faction that I've never played before. I think it's ridiculous. So shout out to Z Garcia on that one. I'm giving him credit because he said that, and I was like, yep, that's definitely got to be on my list because that really bugs me. My number 4, again, is factions eliminated due to player count.
I'm on board with that. That is annoying. I paid for 5 factions.
But you only, and I know you suffered from the same kind of problem of like, you don't necessarily have a lot of people to game all the time.
Right.
I think,
yeah.
Is that a fair assessment? Okay, I didn't want to be
Yeah.
rude, but like,
Yeah.
You got a game you want to play, and it's like, man, we only play with the same 2 or 3 gamers that I have. It's like we never get to play I forget the Dune factions. There's 2 that you can't play with. It's like I've never played with them. And the one time I did try playing with them, the game was broken because, of course, that's why they tell you. And I was like, let's screw it. I want to play with this faction. And it was incredibly broken. We had 3 players, and we were using the 5-player expansion, or not expansion, factions. And so, So yeah, it's like you said, like I bought a ticket. I want to take the ride, like the full ride. I don't want like part of a game and some kind of obligation to get more people to play this game because then that's on me. So that's my number 4 thing. It kind of annoys me. I want to be able to use like the whole game. I want to be able to deal out all the factions and be able to play with all the factions.
All right.
Cool.
Well, my number 4 is the setup takes way too long. And I'm going to say this, especially for shorter games. Yeah. I think we can understand when a game takes a little bit longer to set up. If it's a long, grandiose game, it's going to take some time. But,
yeah. All those Euro games you play.
Yeah. And in fact, Trajan's another good example of this. There's a ton of setup in it, but it does take a while to get through. So, I can live with it. If I can actually convince somebody to play that game with me in the first place. But I have an example, though, a game called Paris Connection. I don't know if you've ever seen it or played it or familiar with it. Essentially, it's kind of like
a train game?
It's a train game. It's route building, and it's actually quite simple. It's route building on a map, and it's like stock. It's a stock game with route building. But anyway, for the 6 different color trains, you got a board like this that's sitting around the main board of the game, and so it's a grid of whatever 4x8 or whatever. So, and then you've got all these little train engines. So after you hand out the train engines to everybody, sorry, but you've got these little tiny. I don't know if I'll get anybody to see, but these little tiny train engines. And you have to fill, according to color, every single one of these boxes with every train that's left over. And I got a bag like this.
Yeah.
And literally takes me, last time I tried this, it took me about a half an hour to fill all these things up. Now, if you had other people helping you, of course, you could slow that down a little bit. But what happened was I was trying to play with my family. By the time I got it all set up, everybody was on to something else. I didn't want to play anymore. And then what happened was I said, okay, I spent all this time setting this game up. It's staying on the table till tomorrow because we will play this game. And then, of course, it didn't get played. And the next day I just got all mad and I went, this game's got to go in my trade pile. I can't deal with this bunch of garbage. So, and that's just one example that frustrated me a little bit recently. But I will say, if a game takes as long to set up as it takes to play, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And it's really it's a big bother to me. A game I like quite a bit that I complain about quite a bit is Robinson Crusoe. And I think there's a fair amount of setup in that game. But I also understand, it's a little bit longer to play. It's not super long, but it's a little longer to play, and there's a lot of moving parts. And
it's scenario based. So depending
Right.
on what scenario you have to set it up specific to that scenario. So it's not just the same setup every single time. That's what slows it down. Exactly. If it's the same setup every time, you could just kind of memorize it, but it's like, no, we're playing a different scenario. So how does it work?
Right. Yep.
And so I like Robinson Crusoe a lot.
But I think on more narrative games, it kind of makes sense. You're probably going to have more setups and variable setups. On something like this game that's closer to a Euro Paris connection, though, boy, that's a killer. Maybe why I got it pretty cheap, I don't know. But
or maybe it's a FEL game.
Yeah. Well, Paris connection isn't a FEL game.
Oh, it's not?
But no. But anyway, yeah, it's so anyway, yeah, setup takes way too long. It's my number 4. It's just something that drives me crazy.
The one big standout anecdote that I have on this one is about a game called Mansions of Madness, the first edition, before they introduced the app. I owned the first edition, and holy cow, I only played it twice. I brought it over to a buddy of mine's house. I did tell him setup is going to take a while because you have to have one person play as the overlord character. I forget what they call it, but someone essentially doesn't play. They just play the house and all the creatures and stuff. That was me. So I told my buddy that this setup's going to take a while. So they went off and watched some anime or played some video games or something. And I remember going through, and it took me so long to set up this game that by the time I was done, I think it took closer to an hour. Not necessarily an hour, but maybe 40, 50 minutes to set it up. By the time we were done, my buddy's wife had finished dinner, and so they're like, oh, we need the table space, clear all this stuff off. And I was like, no. I just set up, everything has to be set appropriately. You gotta follow through stage these cards here. Okay, this card has to be the 4th card deep on this deck over here. And there's a lot to make sure you don't screw up. And so I ended up totally getting rid of that one because the setup was crazy. I do have the 2nd edition, which the app will just kind of do stuff for you and do a lot of that setup and bookkeeping and tell you where to place things. But yes, so I can get on board with that because I've literally just given a game away for practically nothing because I was like, this is not going to hit the table at all. It takes too long to set up. So yeah, good one at number 4. My number 3 is actually, this just happened 2 nights ago for me or whatever, but personally, I don't okay, so I'll just read it. Mine is high scoring games. I don't know why they have to make the scoring be astronomically high. Can't they make the points a little more rare and have a decent amount, a decent scoring? So, for example, when you I recently played a game of The Networks. For those who don't know, The Networks is a card drafting game where you're running your own network TV station, trying to draft different shows and stars to get the most audience or the most viewers. Ask me what a typical game is for The Networks. It's between 200 and 300 points. That's a typical, you're not doing astronomically well. That's just a typical average game between 200 and 300 points. And yes, Brad, there is a board tracker. So you're tracking on this board up to 200, and that's average. And so for some reason that really bugs me. Can't we just scale down the points and have like somewhere between like a 50 and 60 point game being a good game, or maybe under 100. You know, like why does it have to be like, hey, how'd you do in the networks last night? Like I scored 412 points. Like what? Why do we need the point system to go that high? Can't we mitigate the points to be in a little more of a manageable thing? And that goes along with what you were saying about like game end scoring. Sometimes when you score a bunch at the end, like we score this and we score this and then we score this and then we score this, it's like the victory point or the score ends up just getting like crazy high, and it doesn't really mean anything because you'd think 400 points, holy cow, you did awesome, and it's like, well, that's kind of an actual average score for this game, and it just seems weird and feels weird. It's number 3 on my list. The only reason it's on my list is because I played the networks 2 nights ago, and I was like, God, like my score was like 300 something, but I did terrible. I think I took last, but I made 300 points. Yeah, like sell 5. So, personal pet peeve, I would probably say is this one, number 3, is like really, really high scoring games. This kind of bugs me.
So do you think maybe sometimes they do that as a matter of there's more resolution in the score, so you're not going to end up with a tie,
Yeah,
because
probably.
there's more point difference. Of course, that still is, yeah, I understand the pet peeve. I can see why sometimes they do that. But, also, if every time there's a score, it is, like you say, between 200 and 300, you haven't really changed your resolution. You just moved it higher up on the scale. So,
Yeah, that's what I was trying to tell the people I was playing with the networks with, as I was trying to tell them, the game designers could just quantify what is 1 point worth in this game, like meaning like what is it worth in regards to work in the game, and then just scale it, and just like scale it back and fix the scoring, or not the scoring, but fix the victory point type thing. It's like, no, these go to 11. Like, why don't you just make 10 like louder and make 10 the new 11? Like, that's what I'm basically saying is like, why don't you just scale everything down, but then make the average score be like, oh, 110 points. That's an average score. Like, that's more like meaningful to me than just like 300 points, 400 points. You got to add all that stuff up. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Don't really like games with like high scoring. Maybe it's because it's part of like doing a lot of math and calculations is not really a fun thing, and I'm usually pretty bad at math, so I have to get out the old calculator on my phone and stuff. So maybe this is just more of a pet peeve, like I said, than a real actual like beef of like, I'm not playing this game. The victory point track goes up to 400. There's quite a few other games that are like that, but yeah, the networks is one that I played recently that I was like, man, games are always so high scoring. Even if you do really poorly at the game, you're still going to get like 200 points, even if you're not doing very well. So high scoring, my number 3.
Okay. Oh, all right. My number 3 might be on your list. We'll see. But it's basically bad rule books. And I'm just going to say this in this way because it goes beyond just how they're written and things like that. And I'll give you some examples here.
Cool.
I already mentioned, I've got this, what is it? First edition of Robinson Crusoe. Let me grab it. So I've got the one in the old box. The new one's more square, more standard size box.
Yep,
things
I
like
have
that.
the newer one.
So, I literally got that game. One of the early games I got it out of a Canadian store because it was sold out at the time. It was great. I loved the game. So I got the rule book from the original, and this has it's not too bad. It's 20 pages, but I literally could not figure out the game from this rule book. Okay. So I went on Board Game Geek and I printed off another 20 pages of a guy just taking pictures and almost in comic book format, pasting together what you do, how you play through the game, how you do the setup on the first scenario, all these different things. And it's great. And, the game is enjoyable, but man, for me to have to do this to print out another book about the same size as the rule book just to figure out how to play it drove me crazy. But then, I really liked the game. And so when they came out with the new edition, they also gave us the option to, buy some stickers that were in the new game and get the new rule book. So I bought the new rule book, which, as you can see, is square to fit the new box. Well, doesn't fit in my old box, so that's kind of annoying me just a little bit. And so it sits on the shelf next to my game. And honestly, this book is better. I still not loving it. And I don't know if it, Portal Games seems to have a little tough time with their rule books for whatever reason. But that's one thing. So that one kind of annoys me. Another game. Have you played Ghost Stories? It's a cooperative game.
No, I haven't. The Antoine Bauza game?
Yep.
I haven't. I heard it's tough.
It is tough, and it's difficult.
Well, Robinson Crusoe's tough, really tough as well.
But you want to know what's really tough about this game? You almost have zero clue how to work through or how to play around in the game after you read this book. You have to piece it together, from different parts of the book, go back and forth and piece it together. And at the end, they kind of got a flow chart that does explain it a little bit. And sorry, I got this angle just so I don't get the glare off of it. So bad.
Right.
But anyway, the flow chart helps after you've really figured it out, and gone back and forth in this book over and over and over. And then on top of that, when you need to go and find something, this book isn't even that long. It's 12 pages total, front to back. And it still feels like it takes you forever to find a rule. And it just laid out really poorly. And so I have a big issue with that. And so those two are kind of writing issues. In fact, I want to show you. I've got all these player aids that I printed out, laminated for Ghost Stories, just because I can't figure out the rule book very well. There's a guy who does a ton of these and puts them up on BGG for all kinds of different games, and so I took advantage of that. But a game I mentioned earlier on our multiplayer video we did with Jamaica. I think I did as an honorable mention. Jamaica is awesome. The rule book is actually pretty, for the most part, easy to follow, but they got too cute. Okay, here's the rule book, and it's fine. Tells you some stuff on the back. But I want to look up a single rule because I forgot it. It's a treasure map. So now I'm sitting here trying to read off of this giant treasure map to find one stinking rule on a very easy game, and I'm telling you, this is about the most annoying rulebook experience I've ever had in my life. It's okay. You can figure out the game from the rulebook because it's not a tough game. But when you got to find that one odd thing and you got to pull out this giant treasure map to try to figure it out, I was about losing it. In fact, I told my wife when we were gonna make this video. This is the first thing she went, "Oh, you're gonna talk about that treasure map thing, aren't you?" I said I hadn't thought about it, but thanks for reminding me. Yes, I
am. Say, Brad, I can't remember because I have this token. Do I draw one card or two cards at the end of my turn? Hang on. Let me looking for the treasure of the Sierra Madre here. Let's see this whole just one little question. You got to pull out a treasure map.
Yeah, so
that's funny. I've never played that game. I didn't know what the rule book looked like or what it was.
So I think it's great they tried thematically to do something there, but it's just practically it's a nightmare. So, but anyway, bad rule books are my number 3, and I think we're to the point where I think most publishers and designers should be able to figure out how to play test and do all those things to get a little bit tighter rule book, in my opinion. So
I feel that. And it's kind of a blanket statement, which is why I hate to say it. I'll start off with saying, in my experience, a lot of the smaller companies have trouble with their rule books than the more established ones because they're more established. Like, for example, I'll ask you, Brad, Fantasy Flight. Do you think they have good rule books or not?
I think so.
Yeah, I think so for the most part too. But then there's some other ones that I don't know. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the company, But there's a game that I've been playing recently called Book It, and it's a game where you play as a wrestling promoter, like WWF wrestling promoter, like putting on wrestling events, and it's kind of a card drafting, deck building ish kind of game. Anyways, that's not the point. The point is that the rule book is just one sheet, just a front and a back. And to be honest with you, it was like I'm not saying the game's complicated by any stretch of the imagination, but the game does offer certain like really specific interactions that this is just it's not even on there. So it's like I don't really know. Does this card happen first or whatnot? And so the rule book comment for me is usually like Z-Man and like I said, Fantasy Flight games. They usually have a good formula down, and where I've been seeing problems is like some of the smaller companies are still kind of trying to figure out a good system of how to put together a good rule book. What makes a good rule book for you, Brad? Like, what do you think a good rule book looks like?
Um, you know, one publisher that came to mind right away for good rule books for me was Aaliyah, and they do a lot of the Feld games and things like that. But what they do is they'll lay out what you do on your turn, and but on the side of each page they have little notes there, so it's quick to find something if you want to go back to it. They'll just have like a real brief synopsis of what that rule is in that spot. And so a lot of times you can just go back and find that and read it. It makes sense, and that's all you need to read. But if you need more than that, it's exactly where the rule is, in the rule book. And so it's real quick and easy to find. It's hard to find that balance of how to have a good rule book for teaching the game, and then also have a good rule book for referencing the rules when you go back later.
Yeah, I like what Fantasy Flight has been doing with some of their games. The ones that I bought recently, where they've come with a how to play, and then they've come with like a glossary book. They've had like two books where it's like one is more of just like the flow of a turn and some card anatomy and iconography. But then there's also this like glossary that's alphabetical, and you can look up certain keywords or certain things within the second book. I've kind of enjoyed that. Yeah, it's an extra book and it's more junk in your box, but a lot of their Arkham games, I got the third edition of Arkham Horror not too long ago, and it came with one of those, and it did come in handy when I played it and set it up. It was like, well, what does that term technically mean? What happens? Well, you can find it. It's all alphabetical in like the glossary or whatever, appendix or whatever they call it. And so for me, I think a good rule book should have the game set up. It should have like a picture of the game set up. Should have step by steps. That's like got to be number one. Actually, no. Number one should probably be a component list of like, because sometimes it's like take the emerald components and place them on spot 34. And you're like, what are the emerald components? Well, you can look in the front and say, oh, this is what they look like. And that happened recently playing Legends of Andor. And that's great because they had everything listed. So that should be number one. Number two should be like the game should be set up. It should show like a 4-player representation or whatever. And then like a step-by-step: 1, place the board; 2, give 2 pieces to everyone; 3, deal out 3 cards, and like a setup. After that, it's kind of just you could go over like the turn structure. You could go over some of the symbolism in the game as far as like what does this mean. Obviously, like game end triggering stuff and like game end scoring. I feel like there's a pretty good like flow or a template, at least to most games. Now there are some kind of games that go off the beaten path a little bit, like Kitchen Rush would be one, and Time Stories. But I think for the most part, for most just kind of standard games, there's a pretty good flow to rule books. I actually, for my college one of my senior classes, I had to rewrite a rule book, and so I took a rule book that I was not too thrilled with and like rewrote it as one of my projects or whatever. And so it wasn't even a game I really like. Smash Up, it's not even a game I really like, but Smash Up doesn't have a very good rule book, I don't think. and so I worked on that a couple years ago. But yeah, um, I guess spoiler rule books are not on my list because I knew they would be on your list. And so I wanted us to kind of be unique. So I kind of tried to go with stuff that, at least if I could get inside Brad's head a little bit, I was like, I'll put that off the list and I'll leave him to talk about it. So I don't have rule books as mine. So what are we on to? Number two?
Number two.
My number two is contingent on longer games. So I want to make that clear to the audience that this is a really big annoyance in longer games. And I'm talking games that are more than 60 minutes. If you're playing a game for an hour or more, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever, this is what I'm talking about. No tiebreaker. I just can't. I can't. I have to get up and walk away. I'm not going to play 3 hours of my life for your company to say, you guys both share the victory. No, I don't think so. Maybe in a 15, 20-minute little point salad kind of game or something, but not in a 3-hour long epic Lord of the Rings or something like Axis and Allies. And then to get to the end and be like, what's the tiebreaker? Oh, the tiebreaker's whoever has the most money. Okay, well, we both don't have any money. Well, then you guys just share the victory. No, absolutely not. No, I'm not going to just sit there and share the victory. There's got to be, and I know some rule books I've seen have tiebreaker, 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 but they end at some point. They just end and say, if you're still tied at that point, just share the victory. I don't like that. And so again, I need to reiterate just for people that tuning in, watching, this is really hitting for longer games. I don't mind it so much. It's oh, you and I both won. It's a really short game. It only took 10 to 20 minutes to play. But if you're going to play a really long, especially a really thematic game, to just come to the end and be like, who won? Let's look in the book. And it's just you guys both tie. You guys both win. Or everyone wins. I've had a game where we've had a 3-way tie out of a 4-player game, and all 3 of us won because there was no tiebreaker. And it was a really long game, too. We spent the whole evening playing. So number 2, I really get upset about. There's a game called, I know I'm going really anecdotal today. There's a game called Grim Forest. Now, it's not a super long game like an Axis and Allies kind of game, but it does take 60 minutes or more to play. And I was playing it at the local game shop that I was kind of visiting years ago. And me and a buddy of mine at the time, you could tell he and I had stepped up from the pack, point-wise. We were doing better. And I was who's going to win? Me or this guy? And it got down to the end, and I was trash talking, all in good fun, because I knew the guy, and he was kind of trash talking. And we got to the end, and we got to that, I think there was one tiebreaker. Have you ever played Grim Forest?
No, I haven't.
About the big bad wolf and Red Riding Hood and
Sure.
3 Little Pigs and stuff. We got all the way to the end, and I think there was one tiebreaker that they gave in the rule book. I think it was money or something, but we tied on that as well. And then the next thing was you guys both win, just share the victory. And we looked at each other after all that trash talking and was this is such an anticlimactic feeling to all of this chauvinistic stuff that we had been doing over the last hour or so, to just be dude, I guess we both won. That feels weird. And so it honestly kind of tainted my view of Grim Forest. I'm not proclaiming to the audience that it's a bad game at all, but just my impression of it was just we played for so long, and we both ended up kind of tying, and we both ended up winning. So number 2, as you can tell, we're getting closer. I'm getting more animated. I really don't like the whole just share the victory. It really, really bugs me. It's my number 2.
Yeah.
No tiebreaker.
I think about the only time that I'm okay with ties, and I agree with you. Shorter games, not such a big deal. But with kids' games, I think it's really good that, the ties are okay there. That's not a big deal.
Really? Yeah, that's interesting because kids usually want to win if it's a competitive game. I would recommend cooperative games for kids if you wanted to do the the
Right.
whole like you
But
guys both
but
win.
I find, at least the kid, like my kids, when I play with them, if we tied, no big deal. If they beat me, awesome. If I beat them, hurt feelings. So, but the ties go okay. So there I feel okay with it. But yeah, I don't know. Playing a long game and having a tie is not fun. Put it that way. Okay. My number two, I find on my list here. Um, well, it's has to do with specific game components, but it's almost when a publisher gets too cute with their components, and they even maybe make them real nice, but it actually makes the game harder to play. And so that really annoys me. So I said creative game components that make things harder. Um, this one isn't so bad, but I was just thinking about it. So we talked about before, Camel Up or Camel Cup, whatever you want to call it. I got the first edition, so it's a cardboard pyramid. So I think you probably had the newer one that's got the plastic pyramid in it, and
Yeah,
I think the plastic one works a little better.
You've used both?
Yeah, I've used both. Anyway, the idea with this is you have all the different colored dice inside of here, right? And then you shake it up and turn it upside down. On this one, you have to do it a very specific way to get the die to come out. You almost have to set it down on the table, push this in, and then lift it up just a little bit, let this back out, and then that's the only way you get one die to come out. And then if you're lucky, sometimes one comes out at all when you do that. And you're just constantly,
three of them come out at the same time.
Right. So you're just constantly trying to do this, and it's a game where you've got, let's face it, it's kind of an entry level game, right? So the chances are high you're probably playing with people who haven't played too many games or haven't played this before, maybe. So they do it, and just everybody has problems with it. And I love the idea. I mean, it's really cool. Pyramid sits on the board, looks great, but when you're actually playing with it, it just turns into a big pain in the butt. So that's one example.
Would you say, before you jump on, would you say, maybe having a bag and just pulling from a bag and rolling?
Yeah,
That'd be more effective?
Right. I thought that would work better. In fact, I've almost thought about throwing just using a bag, like a canvas bag or something, and just leaving this on the board for the effect of for the theme. And then just using a bag, because it ends up just kind of getting in the way when we're playing that. So it's not I know it's my number two, and that one isn't that big of a deal, but a bigger one for me is in the game Tapestry. I don't know. Have you played Tapestry?
I have Tapestry, yes.
Okay, yeah. So just so everybody knows, in the game Tapestry, you have these little city boards, right? Yeah. And there's whatever 5-6 different ones in here. And then they got these little red orangish dots, whatever. And what you're supposed to do is as you go throughout the game, they've got these really cool buildings.
Yeah, buildings.
And but anyway, these buildings are a specific size to fit on this board. And what happens with some of these is there's little squares. So this is almost like a Sudoku puzzle. It's got 80, there's 9 big squares, and then in each big square there's 9 little squares. Yeah. But anyway, these, when you set them down on the table, anyway, you're setting them on here, but they're supposed to cover a certain amount of these little squares. Well, on some of them, they don't fit exactly right. So you're going, okay, is that actually covering 3? Is it actually covering 4? And you look at you look at it, it's not that big of a, it's not super hard to figure out, but it's enough where sometimes you think you got something covered and you don't, or vice versa. And
it's because the bases,
the
base of the buildings is rounded off or whatever.
Right, they're rounded, and oh, sorry, you see my sticker. I actually did that so I could put them away faster and set them up faster. But
wow.
Anyway, these miniatures, these things are great. They're painted, pre-painted. They come. They're just excellent. But now I'm seeing online, people have actually 3D printed bases that these snap into, so they actually fit on the grid on this on the city tile perfectly. And I'm going, for how much the game costs, and they had to increase the price for these things. I'm going, man, it's great. it's artistic, but you could have done it and still made the bases fit really well on the city maps here, and life would have been a lot easier. When I'm playing this game with other people, it's always the okay, is that actually three wide? Is that or whatever? And they have a little board there where you can tell and everything, but it just to me it was a misstep just because they did so awesome with these things and then they missed the actual point of them by not having them the right size. So that's a couple of examples of things, but really it's the idea of sometimes the publishers getting a little too cute, end up raising the price of the game, and then it actually makes it tougher to play, and that is something that annoys me a little bit when I'm gaming. So
Do you like Tapestry?
I do like Tapestry, actually a fair amount.
Oh,
I've played it very few times though with other players. I've played it almost all the way, solo, almost most of my plays. So that hasn't been
okay.
as big of a deal. It's probably why I'm not ranting about this quite as much as I would be if I played a lot more often with other
Yeah.
players. But um,
Well, I know there was mixed like reviews on it, and so I'm
yeah,
just kind of wondering where you fall.
yeah. No, I enjoy the game. I'll definitely keep it on my shelf.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's some other reasons why playing with others that there was an issue. But anyway, yeah, I enjoy the game, but that's something I wish they would have fixed. I bought it on the initial release and was all excited about it, and
Oh,
but when you spend the money on it for that stuff, then I think it should work better personally. So yeah, that's I guess creative game components that make things harder. That's what I call that. Number two.
that's kind of a weird like thing to put on your list because normally like the better components means like a better game or at least a
Yeah,
better looking game. I know I referenced Grim Forest a moment ago. That's got great miniatures and components and stuff to it as well. The game is, I'd say, swimming in a sea of mediocrity. I mean, it's not good, it's not bad. It's kind of like, oh, okay. Um, but usually those components really attract gamers, right?
right.
Usually it's
Yeah,
like, I know when I have Tapestry as well, when I was looking at the buildings, I was like, these are hella cool.
yeah,
Like I want to play with them, and all the different factions that they have that are all unique and stuff. There's a lot of stuff that kind of helps serve the game, but it's interesting that you put down components that don't serve the game. They kind of like take away from the game. That's interesting. I would never have thought of that. So before getting into my number one, that I'm going to get pretty upset about, and I don't even know why. I'm going to give out like kind of an honorable, dishonorable mention, and I'm just going to go through it really quick because it's a pretty standard one. It might even be your number one, but an honorable mention that I'm going to throw out before I get to my number one is a first player marker, first player token or marker. Um, there are some games that don't really come with them or they make you provide your own and you really need to have a first player marker. There are some games that give you first player markers that are just ridiculous. For example, I'll go back to that game Book It that I was talking about, the wrestling promoter game or whatever. The first player marker is a cardboard punch out of a pencil that says first player on it, and it's this long. It's a pencil that's this long that like sits in front of you, and then you like pass it to someone. It's ridiculous. Um, Although that is completely double standard of me to say because there's a game called Dead of Winter that has like a giant knife, like cardboard knife thing for. And I think that thing's awesome. So maybe it's just because it's a big dumb pencil. I don't know, but kind of a dishonorable mention for me is just no first player markers or really bad dumb, like not interesting first player markers, like a giant flat cardboard pencil that says first player on it. So that's my dishonorable mention. Going into my number one, and this was flat. The first thing that came to my mind, like weeks ago when we first talked about this, we've been talking about this for like 2 weeks now. First thing that came to my mind, and I don't know why I'm so adamant about, or not adamant, but just upset about this is unacceptable, guys. This is like out like companies out there, this is unacceptable. I know not every company does it, but when you have your components, most like not necessarily miniatures like we were talking about, but your punch out components, they call them like chits or whatever, or like little money cardboard components. You double side print. You always print on both sides. Like this is unacceptable. I refuse to accept a game if Brad needs to pick up an extra coin because his dude landed on a space that allows him to give him an extra coin. I want to reach into the coin box and like flip him the cardboard coin, and no matter what side it lands on, I want him to see the coin. It's got to be printed on both sides. I have games where all the money is printed on one side. And guess what's on the other side? Nothing. It's blank. It's completely white. And that's your money. So then you don't, like, you have to always make sure it's flipped to the right side. So, oh, this is a 5 and this is a 10. There's a Z-Man game called The Walking Dead. It's the actual comic book representation, not the mass market AMC one. Exactly. There's a million zombie tokens in it, all one-sided printing. The little trackers that you have, all one-sided. That one's not too bad because it's supposed to just slide on a board, but still, double print your components, like, or double side print your components. This is just unacceptable. I bought a game last year that had that kind of issue where the money was just like, it's only printed on one side of this thing. It makes me so mad because I don't know, I don't work in the board game world. I don't work in the publishing world. I don't know what the cost is of like, oh, we're going to lose so much, like having to double print. But there are a lot of companies that do it, and there are a lot of games out there that have their cardboard pieces printed on both sides. I want my money to be printed on both sides. And so my number one, I guess the title I have is No Double-Sided Printed Components. It's just, I don't know why, because it's one of those things. I'll tell you why I'm so mad. It's because it's one of those things that happens in the industry that shouldn't, right? Just like maybe rule books. I know Tom Bassel, again, the Dice Tower, has talked about there's no like excuse for poor rule books. He's like, we've had board games for decades and decades. We're getting better, bigger and better. Games are getting more efficient. They're getting more interesting. They're getting more unique. There's no reason to just have like blah, 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 mush for your rule book. And so that's another one. Again, I said I didn't put rule books on my list just because I wanted to go with something else. But that's another one. Like rule books, unacceptable. You pull out like a one sheet thing. It's just like, this doesn't tell me a whole lot. Like there's got to be more to it. That's unacceptable. And same with the double-sided printing. That's just unacceptable. Like I wouldn't want to buy a poker deck with just one side printed on the card or something. I don't know. Again, I don't know the margins. I don't know what like the profit loss or gains or whatever would be. But as a player, no, do not sell me a game that's not double-sided. No. Number one is double-sided printing on all the pieces.
And I know I've seen this, and I know it annoys me a bunch too, but I can't think of any game specifically that I have where it is. I'm sure I know I have some, but yes, I know that has driven me crazy. Where and basically, there's sometimes, especially with money, and they have coins. A lot of times, I like to throw all the coins in the same bag because you're going to be drawing ones or fives or ones or twos or whatever throughout the game. But now I can't see what they are, even when I want to pick them out of there, unless I've gone through and turned them all over and wasted a bunch of time with that, or it's a time waster during a game. So
yeah, that Walking Dead game that I referenced by Z-Man, the game itself is a decent game. I wish the board was a little bigger. There are some other things about it, but that whole game, every cardboard punch out, everything that you punch out in that game is on one side, and that's just like, I can't. I still have it. It's on my shelf. I don't play it. It's just I can't. If I come across someone that's a huge Walking Dead fan, maybe I could say like I got something that will trigger that fandom in you. and get you to play a game. But in regards to that production, I wanted to write a letter. I mean, like this is unacceptable. Like in the age that we live in, it's unacceptable. Just like rule books. So that was the first thing that came to my mind when we set this thing up like 2 weeks ago. I was like putting that one down. Like that stupid Walking Dead game that ticks me off every time. That was the first thing I put down. So that's why I made it my number one. Because I can't. So let's hear about your number one. If you're still with me. All right. Sorry about that, everyone. We had some issues, or at least I did. My modem completely went dead, and so we lost our feed. We were kind of in the middle of putting our video together. So through the powers of editing, I've kind of just edited some of this together, even though this is a little bit of a later time. So what we were talking about, or at least what I remember before my modem took a crap, was my number one is not having double-sided printing on pieces. So without further ado, because we've been trying to get connected again, I'm going to throw it to Brad for his number one so we can kind of get this thing going.
Sure. I was going to mention I had a dishonorable mention as well.
Okay, go for it.
And I could only think of one game off the top of my head. That's why I originally had it on my list, but I took it off because I couldn't think of more examples. But my dishonorable mention is when components lead to rules misinterpretations. And so there's a game I have called Bunny Kingdom is the one that stuck out for me. And so Bunny Kingdom, there's a grid of squares across the whole board. And you can put these tiles on there that are called buildings. Now, if you take your square and you cut it in half diagonally, when you put a building, not a city, but a building on the board, it's like a triangle that'll fit half of that square. Now, if you look at them, you could put two of those triangles on there and it would fit perfectly on a square. And it looks like you should be able to fit two of those buildings on any of your squares. But really you're only allowed to put one. And I'm going, well, why did you make the tiles perfectly fit in there so they'd fit two? When, because every time you play somebody new, they automatically think you can put two in there, even when you tell them you can't. And the rules, explanation, you gotta really enforce it, or really reinforce that in their brains. And so when to me, to have components that make you think the rules are different than what they actually are, is really a pain in the butt. So that's why it's a dishonorable mention.
Misleading components. So my example of that is a game called Bang. And it's the dice game, not the card game, because the card game's too long, it's trash. But the dice game comes with these little, again, they're cardboard punch-outs that are printed on both sides, and they're little bullet tokens. And so in Bang, you're playing, it's like a country, it's a Western kind of feel with like a sheriff and outlaws and like trying to kill each other and you're shooting at each other. Everyone thinks that it's ammo, and it's not, it's your health. Why would they make a little ammo, like a little bullet thing, be your health? Why would they make them like little hearts or something, like a little heart thing on them? And someone actually, a new person that came to my gaming group where I did explain this game to them, and I did have to go through the whole embarrassing, like, this is your health. I know it's a bullet. It looks like, your ammo, your ability to shoot, but it's actually your health. And they threw out that idea. They were like, well, why didn't they just put like little hearts on these little things? And I was like, yeah, why? Like, it's like such a no-brainer. So that's my story for your dishonorable mention is Bang, the dice game. Like, it's just like, it's bullets. I'm giving you bullets, but it's really your health. I don't know why bullets equal your health in this game, but yeah.
I mentioned at the beginning of the video, my 1 and 2 kind of played off of each other a little bit, and so that's why my number two wasn't.
What was your
My number two was when they have they get too creative with the game components, and then they actually make the game harder to play. So on Tapestry, where the buildings didn't fit quite right.
All right.
Okay.
So it's probably component related.
Yeah. What's even worse than that is when they get cheap and it makes the game worse, because they decided not to, make a component that actually would work because it was too cheap to do it. I can at least appreciate like what Jamie did or what Stonemeyer Games did with Tapestry. They tried to make it nice. Didn't fit, but whatever. I got a couple examples. Betrayal at House on the Hill. Now, spoiler alert, I'm not a huge fan of that game if you watched other videos with me.
I think I know what this is going to be. Can
But
I
yeah,
guess?
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
sorry. Yeah, the stat tracker. So I've got this little sliding plastic piece here. Oops. It goes, and you've got four, different categories for your stats. Now we put this on here, and it's supposed to match up with this number, and
it falls off, and yeah,
you know, and not every single one does that. They say, oh, you run it under warm water, and you try to warp them, you do all that. Give me a break. I'm not going to waste my time doing all that. So.
Oh, but you did waste your time printing out labels, laminating them, printing out an alternative rule book for a game. It's interesting.
Well,
like what you're like, I'm not going to waste my time on that.
Well,
I gotta laminate these things for this game.
Which games did I? Which games did I like?
I have not laminated anything from my game. None of my games have any extra lamination going on.
Well, yeah. If you see I laminated it, probably it's because I like the game and wanted to make sure I could make it work. Another one, and this is probably a more recent but still classic example. It's like Terraforming Mars. I keep hearing people are not happy with the component quality. These are your boards, and to track kind of like a stat thing, but it's income and whatever you have on the board.
Resources.
Yeah, and I tell you what, you put these little plastic cubes on top of this thing, and even their metal cubes, like they'll flake off the finish on them and whatever. But boy, you barely touch this. It's going to keep track of what like an income on here. You barely touch your table or whatever, and they move around, and you've got 6 of them on this board. Okay, now if I didn't remember exactly where all 6 of those things were, it kind of destroys the whole game. So now I really like Terraforming Mars, and so my brother for Christmas got me off of Etsy this little inlaid wooden board. And so you just stick it over the top of your board.
Oh, so how does it work? Does it work okay?
Never gotten to use them, unfortunately. But yeah, I think it'll work great. I mean, it's 2 pieces of wood glued on top of each other. So yeah.
Well, now they've announced the deluxe version. You're gonna get your overlays and your 3D printed tiles and stuff. See, for me, it's usually like a sleeve thing. Like I'll reach out for the board or something, and then my sleeves will like bump I'll be wearing a sweater or something, I don't know, and like they'll bump all the cubes in front of me, and I'll be like, I'm not sure where I was at, because I was reaching out to do something like maybe put a tile out or something.
Yeah.
That's a really, really actually good example. Like kudos on that. I didn't even think like Terraforming Mars is a really solid game. And granted, I've only played the base game in one of the expansions at one time, but as a base game that I own, it's a really solid game. But like the artwork on the cards, the player boards, like there's a lot of stuff that's just like, come on, man. Like how did someone at Stronghold not sit down and go, these player boards, like I just don't. Same with the bang thing. Like, why don't we just make them little hearts if they're supposed to be your hit point? Like, I would love to be in some of these creative meetings sometimes when they they'll be fine. We don't need overlays.
I think I think Stronghold is actually trying to do some manufacturing inside the United States. And I almost wonder if that isn't part of what happened at Terraforming Mars, is they were trying to save costs on the maybe I shouldn't speculate on it, but I know they were pushing hard on that, and I think it was more expensive than Chinese manufacturing. So I had a feeling that might have been the case. But regardless, great game, but boy, the components really did it a disservice in my mind. So,
are you interested in the big box, the deluxe version that they're kind of pushing on Kickstarter?
Boy, I saw it and I went, that'd be so awesome, and it just was too much money for what I was going to get, I thought. And I mean, all the 3D printed stuff, I don't know. It wasn't striking me enough to go after it, but I don't know. I'm kind of at the point where I'm going, I've got a couple of expansions, and I've got those extra boards on top of it to lay over and those things. And I think I got enough game there for a while to stick with it. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah. So my number one is basically cheap components that can easily ruin a game.
Yeah. Terraforming Mars. That's a really great example. I can't think. See, I'm racking my brain of like, what's a game that I really like where the components are just trash. I mean, Terraforming Mars, we've kind of already covered. All the other games that I really like top 10 sort of games, they usually have pretty good components. If anywhere from kind of mediocre but still okay to like really good components, i.e. like Scythe and stuff like that, like really good. I even upgraded components on my Scythe stuff. I have like the big box for it. Um, there's a game called Tainted Grail. Um, the something of Avalon or whatever, Tainted Grail, and they have the exact same thing. And it's like they learned exactly what to do from Stronghold because they have your player board and you have cubes that sit on your player board, and it's all indented. Like the cardboard is all indented for your. I'm just like, and then there's little areas for food, like a little food area where you're gonna throw a bunch of cubes in to represent how much food you have. And again, it's all inset, like indented or whatever. And I was just like, look at this player board. It's doable. Like Stronghold could have done this, like what Tainted Grail does, and have just little cardboard inlets or whatever for the cubes and stuff, or little in cut trays. But yeah, the components can definitely anything from like the cardstock to the chits to like maybe having a miniature when they have like a little round chit instead. That's one thing, or maybe sometimes there's a miniature where you don't really need a miniature. I'm not really sure. I always prefer miniatures over. One thing I really don't like. It's not on my list. This is kind of just me rambling. Is when you have a cardboard picture that you just put in like a little stand and that's your character. Come on, that's so plebeian. That's like, what is this, 1982? Like, that was fine back in like the 80s or maybe the 90s or so. You have this little thing. You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, cardboard standees.
Yeah, it's a standee, and you just kind of move your standee around, and it's just like, man, a miniature would have been really nice. Granted, of course, cost, production, like it's going to make things cost more, but I really don't like looking down at a board and just kind of taking it in and just seeing like a bunch of standees for like the good guys. The monsters are standees. Sometimes they're not even standees. Sometimes they're just like little tokens, and it's just like, this could have been like, could have really popped and been more three-dimensionally, like aesthetically pleasing if it had miniatures. But that's just my 2 cents. So that's all through our 5-to-1 of things that we find annoying within games. We may be brave and bold and do another video at some point where we'll talk a little bit more about the gaming experience and things that annoy us about the gaming experience. If we get kind of bold to do that. But that's our list for now. Sorry about the interruption. Hopefully everything kind of came together. We got through our list, and I was able to get my internet back and running so that we could finish off. So that's everything that I have today. I'm going to put my sunglasses back on. Wish everyone a happy 4th of July, even though you probably are watching this like a week from now. But so happy 4th of July, Brad. I guess I can say that to you since you're here.
Happy 4th.
And that's going to be it. So thanks everyone for tuning in and sticking with us through all the problems and everything like that. And as always, I will see you guys all at the next video. Bye.